Hello, my name is Colton Hines, and today I'll be giving a presentation on the Geneva Convention of 1864. The main points that I'll be discussing today are the state of Europe, the reasons for the convention, Henry Dunant, the Battle of Solferino, the convention itself, the effects on the present, and then a brief conclusion. Before the convention was formed, Europe was in a state that was riddled with war and smaller battles. We see the Crimean War before the convention, and the attempts to have meetings between multiple countries usually did not go anywhere of substance. In 1860, just 4 years prior, we see one of these attempts made, but due to the release of pamphlets from one country, it was immediately ended. All future progress was stopped, and this shows that European countries were not ready to have the conversations with each other that were needed at the time. Now, as we move on to the reasons. Firstly, wars. Wars up to this point have had few to no rules, and this also applied to those considered to be non-combatants. Marat says, wars were conducted in a way very far from being humanitarian. War practices were the most cruel possible, and war customs did not limit such inhuman practices as the killing or making slaves of civilians, and the burning of enemy cities. So up until this point, the rules for how to treat those that were not active combatants was unguided, and soldiers and countries were allowed to treat their enemies how they saw fit. But, however, this view did not only apply to those of enemy armies and countries. Robert states, following the French Revolution and the introduction to conscription, many armies had become careless about the health of their own troops, whose numbers could have always been made up by new levies. There was no agreement on the status of medical personnel. This shows that even the soldiers of one's own country was being mistreated, because they were viewed as replaceable. This lack of care brings forth the reason for a change. This change, however, was not only needed in Europe. Here in the United States we also saw the need. Our own version, dubbed the Lieber Code, was created during the Civil War for U.S. troops to follow. It was created for Abraham Lincoln and the Union Army by Francis Lieber and covered many of the same topics as the Geneva Convention of 1864. As I continue talking about the Geneva Convention of 1864, it is important to note that Henry Dunant is the man who was deemed responsible for the meeting even taking place. Henry Dunant was a Swiss businessman who traveled to Italy to speak with Napoleon III about future business deals. While traveling, he found himself observing the Battle of Solferino and the treatment of the wounded soldiers there. But as soon as his business dealings were done in Algeria, he went to retreat to Geneva, studied the campaign in Italy, and committed his testimony to a book that became a historical milestone, A Memory of Solferino. The Battle of Solferino itself was fought in 1859 between the armies of France, Austria, and Piedmont Sardinia. This battle is where Dunant gained his information for his book, A Memory of Solferino, which leads him to address the needs of the wounded soldiers and victims of wars and battles. One quote that best describes the scenes of the battle, from A Memory of Solferino. A little further on, it is the same picture, only made the more ghastly by the approach of a squadron of cavalry, which gallops by, crushing dead and dying beneath its horses' hoofs. One poor wounded man has his jaw carried away, another his head shattered. A third, who could have been saved, has his chest beaten in. Oaths and shrieks of rage, groans of anguish and despair, mingle with the whinnying of horses. These scenes, although most noted here, were not only found here. These words could have been common across all conflicts, even if nobody saw them. With Dunant recognizing this, he set out to bring awareness to these horrors. With him witnessing these horrors, that led him to start the International Committee of the Red Cross, but at the same time, the Geneva Convention was created as well. The conference led to the adoption of the First Geneva Convention for the amelioration of the condition of the wounded in armies in the field, which was signed by 12 countries. The convention provided the impartial treatment of all military, the protection of civilians assisting the wounded, and the immunity from capture or destruction of those societies providing treatment to the wounded and sick. These reasons of creation were for the exact same that Dunant saw in his time observing the wounded and soldiers of Solferino. The convention itself was signed by 12 separate states. These were the Swiss, Baden, Belgium, Denmark, Spain, France, Hesse, Italy, Netherlands, Portugal, Prussia, and Württemberg. More states signed an agreement later during the other conventions. The 10 articles that were signed in agreements are listed. Article 1. Ambulance and hospitals are to be treated as neutral. Article 2. Those attending to wounded inside the hospitals are to be treated as neutral. This includes doctors, nurses, and even chaplains. Article 3. Those listed in Article 2 may leave their post to return to their own country, or they can be delivered to them by the invading army. 4. Medical equipment cannot be taken from the hospitals, and the same goes for ambulances. Article 5 talks about those who help wounded must be treated as neutral, and homes that are taken in soldiers cannot be used to quarter troops. Article 6. Wounded and sick soldiers must be taken care of. Also, those who are unfit to return to battle after their wounds have healed must be sent home. Article 7 talks about how they issue a uniform for the ICRC members, which is a Red Cross. And Article 8 talks about the top armies of war must follow the directions of their governments in line with this convention. Article 9 states that other nations may join this convention and the convention is left open. Article 10 states that those that agree and present have signed the convention and they will meet again in 4 months for ratifications. The impact of the convention on the present is that it sets rules for those who are combatants and not in battles and war. The ICRC has a very impactful quote regarding this. It is easy to forget how much worse the fate of all humans would be in the absence of the Geneva Conventions and the International Committee of the Red Cross. In the midst of the atrocities that persist today, they hold us to a higher standard of human dignity that cannot be contracted away. In conclusion, Henry Dunant's account and the efforts to make those impacted by war and conflicts led to the Geneva Convention and in turn the International Committee of the Red Cross. Without the Geneva Convention, there would be no rules in the treatment of those impacted by the conflicts that raged around them. Thank you.